Today I want to talk about a complicated psychological and philosophical topic: the validity of personal responsibility as a truth or a lie, and an idea that serves a positive or negative utility. We often face blame for our actions and are generally viewed as responsible for them. This can result in anything from praise to condemnation, love or hatred. It can be quite an intimidating thing, particularly when we have to make very weighty decisions, knowing that if something goes wrong or right, we will be viewed as responsible. This responsibility for our actions is all-encompassing. It has legal and social significance, and also has an internal psychological influence on us, as we consider how good or bad we are as people, based on our actions. This idea of responsibility for our actions is fundamentally based on the idea that we have free will. It is based on the idea that we could have freely chosen another path. We could have chosen good instead of bad, or bad instead of good, and we are responsible for those free decisions. We are free actors who can, in most circumstances, freely choose from a diverse range of options. We are not puppets dictated by circumstance and causation, but instead people who can freely choose and mold our own futures. But what if I told you this idea, underlying the idea of personal responsibility, was itself a lie? What if I told you that there is no conceivable way in which free will exists? In psychology, human behavior is attributed to nature or nurture. This is a famous debate in the field. This is the dichotomy. Neither of these ways of explaining behavior leave any room for free will. You do not choose your environment, and you do not choose your genetics. Our behavior is dictated from the beginning by causes outside of our control. The intricate nature of our consciousness keeps us from ever understanding the fact that we are mere puppets at the mercy of circumstance and causation. This is something which we find ungraspable, even when we understand it to be the case. What would free will even look like? What is free will? When we think about it for just a minute, no explanation outside of the supernatural can be conceived of. We can, however, easily explain our behavior through factors outside of our control, such as nature and nurture. We are at the mercy of circumstance and causation. This means that the idea of personal responsibility is based on an absurd and irrational lie. We are not free actors who can freely choose to act differently. We sometimes feel we are, but this is simply the intricate and complex consciousness to be expected from one of the most complex biological structures to ever exist. Personal responsibility is based on a lie. The idea that is significant to our laws, social attitudes, and our perceptions of ourselves, and to those close to us, is based on a lie. We are puppets who lack free control. Our actions are molded by circumstance and causation. We are just the consciousness, the sentience, that has the pleasure of experiencing the pleasures and pains of this predetermined journey. We feel that we can choose how we act, but this is just the illusion generously provided to us by our consciousness, as it acts on factors so complex our conscious mind could never even conceive of most of them. It can be a liberating idea to know that technically you are not responsible for any of your actions. It can also be an incredibly dangerous idea. If we are not to blame for wrongdoing, then we have immediately given up self-blame, something which undeniably keeps many people from immorality. We are no longer responsible for our actions, and their weight is suddenly decreased. Determinist reasoning has already been used to defend egregious acts. It is on these grounds that I do not believe in free will, but do believe we should treat personal responsibility as a serious idea regardless. Personal responsibility, you see, is given some value by this deterministic reasoning. Personal responsibility is a determining factor itself. It may not be based on reality, but it has real consequences on reality, when it encourages and causes good moral behavior. Truth only matters in of so far as it serves a social utility. Therefore, while it may not be technically true, acting as if it is can be justified if it leads to the most moral outcomes. Personal responsibility can lead to the best outcomes by acting as a determining environmental factor, which encourages good behavior through its influence, socially, legally, and psychologically. It leads to more moral behavior. So long as people blame themselves for their actions, they will be inclined to stray away from immorality, which would be a stain on their personal character, and could see them facing harmful social and legal consequences. We should want moral outcomes, even if we have come to accept free will does not exist. We can still feel pleasure and pain. We are still sentient. Happiness is still a very real emotion we experience, whether we are free actors or not. Free will may be technically untrue, but sentience is not, and for this reason morality remains important. With the demise of the lie of free will, personal responsibility, which is propped up by said free will, ironically finds new purpose as an environmental factor that can mold human behavior and guarantee good outcomes. Just ask yourself, who acts more morally? A man who views himself as having zero moral responsibility for his actions, or a man who feels he is responsible for his actions, and that his actions define who he is as a person? It is very clear who acts more morally out of the two. It is true that personal responsibility can have negative impacts as an idea, particularly when people suffer with unjustified guilt or anxiety relating to their decisions. Also, with harsh legal penalties and the like. Personally, I have come to the seemingly absurd and incompatible conclusion that free will and personal responsibility do not exist, but as a sentient creature who can suffer, it is in my interest to promote moral ideas and to maintain a moral society. Personal responsibility, if viewed correctly, can be a strong force for achieving this society. To ensure the ultimate good, I argue for the pairing of the incompatible and incoherent. Personal responsibility of a new kind, one that exists solely to determine the best moral outcomes, as an environmental factor. When we abandon free will, we can understand the moral good offered by the concept of personal responsibility. We can view it as the determining factor that it is to guarantee the most pleasant experience for our sentience. We can seek to balance this with the opposite idea, which can also be of some value. The idea that we should not hate others, even when they deserve hatred. In our eyes, we can acknowledge they were different to us only due to circumstance. This can also liberate us of some negative emotions. It could easily be argued that this undermines personal responsibility, and I think to some degree it does, but perhaps these things can be balanced. Can these two blatantly opposed ideas of personal responsibility and the absence of free will be balanced to ensure the greater good for society? What do you think? I hope so, but I am unsure. Fundamentally, this is an issue of psychology and philosophy. Psychology is central to the discussion of whether free will, the basis of personal responsibility, exists. Philosophy is central to the discussion of whether we should act as if it exists or not. This is a very complicated topic, and I hope you have found my thoughts on it somewhat interesting. This was a rather convoluted and unusual one. If you have any thoughts, criticisms, or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And well done for getting this far.